Welcome everyone to our first event, online event in November. We are celebrating National Native American Heritage Month with Steve Johnson, our member Steve Johnson, who is giving his second presentation. He started his back in June with Gaspar de Portola, Native Americans and the Foundation of California. And we thought we created this event together in order to acknowledge this important commemoration about the Native Americans in the US, and specifically Steve Johnson is an expert of the local tribes of the Bay Area. That's what he's going to talk about today. Just a little bit of information on National Native American Heritage Month that was since 1990 was approved by President George W. Bush and was designated for the first time as a celebration. In the Bay Area, we have a lot of recognition about this celebration. And Steve Johnson, he has a degree in U.S. history from San Francisco State University, and he has been an educator for 30 years. He has taught California history, and as an actor, he has portrayed various California characters like James Marshall, Emperor Norton, Domenico Ghirardelli. He's also a National Park Service volunteer on Alcatraz, the Presidio, and Fort Point. He also runs walking tours in San Francisco, and he's a board member of the Pacifica Historical Society. Okay, so I see that we have more and more people signing in, but I will remind everyone to please mute their computer so we don't have any feedback during the presentation. If you have any question, please write your question on the chat box. I will be checking the questions, and at the end of the presentation, Steve will be talking for about 1 hour, and at the end of the presentation, we will ask those questions to Steve. Also, something really important that I would like to say before leaving the microphone to Steve, that Steve has committed to double to match any gratuity that we'll receive today or after the event, and he will forward this donation to the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians in Santa Rosa. Is this the right pronunciation, Steve?
Yes, it's Kashia.
Kashia Band of
Kashaya, actually.
Of Pomo Indian in Santa Rosa. They will use these funds for masks and sanitizers and food boxes for elders. And I will be sharing his PayPal account on the chat box, and also I will send an email tomorrow with the recording of the presentation and the PayPal. Okay, Steve, are you ready?
I am.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Roberto. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope this will be a nice distraction from what's going on in the outside world. And the reason I wanted to do this is because too often, and when we talk about California history, to our visitors, we don't mention about the first people who were here. I think it's extremely important to talk about them because, after all, they were here for millennia. They knew the land intimately, and they learned to live with the land in perfect harmony. And they have much to teach us even today. So I hope you'll get some of that as I talk about just 3 of the many tribes that were in California, or maybe 4. I wanted to do a lot of tribes, so I had to limit it because of time, so we're just going to do basically 4 tribes in the Bay Area, but you'll get a sense of the life of Bay Area natives by when I talk about these particular tribes. So when I talk about tribes, I mean groups that spoke a similar language and had a similar culture. And there are about 150 tribes living what we now call California. But in reality, each group was made up of small tribelets that lived independently in a specific area. These tribelets would consist of several villages, with one main village being where the chief resided. There were 60 different languages spoken among these tribes in California, and Europeans were amazed at the variety and the differences in those languages. A village in one area might speak a comparatively different language from a neighboring village just 5 miles away. This led linguists to surmise that successive waves of immigrants edged out previous occupiers of the land, as seen by the Pomo and Chumash people on the coast. So if you look at this map, you'll see the Pomo north of San Francisco, and then further down the coast in purple, you'll see the Chumash people of Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. Now they spoke a similar language, the Hokan language, which is actually rather ancient. But many of the tribes surrounding them, such as the Miwok, spoke Penutian language, which is more related to the languages spoken up in Washington state, like the Yakima tribe. So you can see that these languages traveled with the people, and it is pretty amazing the wide variety of languages. Very few places on Earth, I think, have so many different languages in just one area. Today, well, over a long period of time, these similar languages evolved into separate ones. And out of those 60 different languages, about 30 are still spoken by their people today. Each tribe in California had an intimate relationship with the land and animals in their territory. From the Yuroks of the Redwood Country in the north, to the Winton of the Sacramento River Valley, and the Pomo and Chumash people along the coast, to the Yokuts of the Delta, the Miwoks of the coastal and Sierra foothills, and to the Gabrielinos and Mojave people of the southern deserts. All these people found a way to live in perfect harmony with the natural world. For thousands of years, unique in human history, they lived in a healthy, peaceful world where nature provided everything they needed. Now think of all the things that were going on in the world, you know, in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, religious wars and famines and invasions and conflicts. But the people in California were living in a way, a type of paradise where they had all the food they needed. There was very little conflict. There was very little and very few invasions after, say, maybe 1,000 years ago. So prior to contact, they were leading a very beautiful life, frankly. So I'm going to give you some talking points, which when you're doing your tours and you want to talk about Bay Area tribes, these are the points I think you should offer to people. The first would be that the California Native people were hunter-gatherers. California tribes did not grow food such as the Navajos and the Mayans. Everything they needed for food, clothing, and shelter and tools were found all around them. While some Northern California tribes like the Yuroks and the Modocs had settlements of redwood plank houses, the tribes of the Bay Area moved during the year for seasonal harvests. In the spring, they would go to where the grasses and greens were coming up. In the summer, they would collect berries, fish, and hunt game. In the fall, they would harvest the acorns, buckeye, and pine nuts. And here you can see a lot going on. The hunters just brought in a rabbit, which was a staple in their diet. The women are, some of the women, it looks like, are preparing acorn. Some are bringing in reeds to build a tule hut. Some are winnowing the acorn nuts. There's fishing going on. So everybody had a job to do in the village. The hunters would typically get a deer skin that had been gutted and dried, and they would put it over them. And then they would prepare for a whole day or two before they went out on the hunt. They wanted to prepare themselves physically and spiritually. They would go into the sweat lodge and sweat out their human scent and rub themselves with angelica leaves or bay leaves. They would fast, pray to the animal spirits, and open themselves to the dream world, hoping that an animal ally might help them in their quest. After much preparation, the hunter would find the herd of deer and begin to imitate deer behaviors. Finally, when close, he would shoot his arrow, and after killing the deer, would pray to its spirit and thank it for giving its life to him. On return to the village, he would share the meat with his family, his relatives, and anyone in need. He himself would eat little, showing good manners to the village and to the deer's spirit. And of course, everything in the deer was used. They ate the organs. They used the skin for clothing. The horns were used as tools. The brains were used for tanning hides. And the hooves were used as rattles. Women were the keepers of knowledge of the plant world. They knew every plant in the area and its use, either for food, medicine, or for basket making. They would spend many hours preparing acorns whose tannic acid had to be removed before eating. The nuts were cracked, the seeds were pounded into a flour, and this was rinsed many, many times to get rid of the tannins. The acorn meal would be then put into, would be dried and then made into a bread, or put directly into water to make a soup, or they could make cakes out of it. The acorns could be stored through the winter for a source of protein during lean times. Oak trees were found all through California, and the acorn was a staple for most tribes. The two most prized acorns were from the valley oak and the black oak. Here are some of the common foods of native Californians. The seeds would be collected by going out with a beater sort of to knock the seeds into a wide basket. And then those seeds would be brought back and crushed and made into a pudding or added to other things. And they were very nutritious. The acorn I already mentioned. They also use the nuts from the buckeye, and of course the pine nuts were very prized. The cattail was just an amazing plant because you could eat the root. The shoots could be eaten. The stalks would be used and dried out to make their homes. The leaves could be used. It was a very valuable plant found throughout river and delta areas. Soaproot was another thing. They would take soaproot, and you could take the top part and make a brush out of it. The root you could boil and eat. You'd have to leach it out a bit first because the liquid from soaproot could be used to stun fish. So they would take the soaproot, they'd squeeze out the juice, put it into water. For some reason, it would make the fish float to the top, and that was an easy way to catch fish. Of course, you all know about miner's lettuce, which still grows all over California. The bracken ferns, you could actually eat the tips. Monkey flowers, some restaurants, put monkey flowers in their salads today. Among game, of course, deer was probably the most available, but you also had elk. Rabbits were everywhere. Keep in mind that the animals of their time were so much more abundant than they are today. They were just everywhere. They were a lot tamer also, so you could you could get closer to them than you can today. They would eat wood rats and squirrels. That would be the boys' first chance to hunt, would be hunting for squirrels. Of course, most rivers and creeks in California had salmon. That was a common thing. And of course, salmon can be smoked and saved for throughout the year. Catfish, bass, trout were all available. And those who lived close to the coast had a wide range of fish and shellfish and seaweeds to eat. The Spanish would say that when they first arrived, the skies would be dark, literally dark, with an amount of birds flying over, ducks, geese, all kinds of winterfowl, waterfowl, quail, pigeon. And they would gather up grasshoppers and cook them just like we'd have potato chips. It was a snack for them. They'd also hunt for termite grubs and cook them as well. This drove the Americans crazy when they saw Indians. They really had contempt for the Indians for spending a lot of time digging in the dirt and getting out roots and grubs. They thought it was so primitive. But you know, those are great sources of protein, and you want to use all sources when you are looking for your own food. So here are some common dishes that are served at the Ohlone Cafe, which I'll tell you about later. But these are traditional Indian foods. Starting on the right, you'll see the salad there of mixed greens with flowers and berries and seeds. Then on the lower left, you'll see quail eggs. Then next to that, I believe those are onions. And then next to that is a chia pudding made of chia seeds. Over on the top left are Indian potatoes. I think those are buckwheat flour rolls next. And then the dish at the top there, I'm not quite sure what that is because I never had it. So I'll have to go back to the cafe to find out what it is. But I'll tell you about going to the cafe a little bit later. So the next talking point is the California natives were part of the natural world. And, you know, in our modern America, when we talk about nature, we talk about, you know, going on a camping trip out to the park, and going to nature is something separate from our regular life. But of course, for the native people, the natural world was their life, and they were so intimately connected. In their little world, they knew all the major rocks, all the trees. They had names for them because these names would be passed down from generation to generation. And they knew where to find all the different kinds of plants they needed, where the nuts and seeds were. And also they felt spiritually connected. When I say intimately involved, they looked at themselves as part of the great world of the Creator. They were all part of the same creation. And they looked at animals as their cousins, literally. And so they had great respect for the animals. They felt the animals could teach them things. And they had many, many stories about animals. I'm sure you know that the coyote was considered the trickster, but he also was the creator of many things. And the bear was symbol of power and strength. So clans were formed with an animal protector, animal spirit, and it was a matrilineal society, so you inherited things from your mother. This is a typical scene around a waterway, and you can see the huts. So you take willow branches and you bend them and tie them up with deer skin string, and then you go out and collect bundles of tule and put them in layers, starting at the bottom, working way to the top. You leave a little hole at the top for the smoke, and you could have small families or even large families. I've seen some of these tule huts that can hold 50 to 60 people. Down in Santa Barbara, the Chumash would make these really large huts for their people, or I should say homes for their people. You can see somebody is drying some fish, and somebody's preparing the acorns. Another thing about the Native people was that life was a matter of keeping everything in balance. From the earliest time, you learned what is your responsibility in life. What are your duties and obligations? Men do the hunting, women collect the plants. The more you give away, the greater esteem you have in the village. Everyone is expected to act honorably and decently and to respect the taboos. If you violate a taboo, it can be very, very dangerous because then you could get sick because you've created some unbalance in the world and you become sick. So now you have to hope that the shaman can come and chase away the spirits, the bad spirits who have inhabited you. And there are different kinds of shamans. Some were medicine shamans who could prepare plants and teas for you to eat and drink, or you had the spirit shamans who would chase away the evil spirits. So here a sick person is being treated, and you can see the basket maker in the foreground, the arrow maker. So it's important to bring up this very sensitive issue about the missions. I know when I was growing up in Catholic school, the missions were, they told us, were there to civilize the Indians, to bring religion to them, Christianity, so they could go to heaven, to teach them the ways of agriculture, and therefore they could become civilized and good citizens of the Spanish Empire. So that's been the narrative for so long. And now we're beginning to realize that there's a lot missing from that narrative. We're now going through a period of reform to tell the true story of the missions. While some of the padres might have been well-intentioned and kind, the missions were basically labor camps. And there are plenty of records of missionaries who were actually very cruel. The ultimate result of the missions was the death of thousands of native people due to disease. Measles was a big killer, and starvation. The reason starvation happened is because the Spanish brought in all kinds of domesticated animals and they would let them roam the hills and they would eat the acorns and the grass seeds, which the non-mission Indians relied on for their food. So eventually, even if you didn't want to come to the mission, you had to end up at the mission because you were starving, because the domesticated animals were eating up your food. And of course, if you dared to kill any of the cattle or sheep, the soldiers would come and take you into the mission and punish you. So this was the range of the mission territory. So each color shows you the extent of the mission influence. So for the San Francisco mission, that extended all the way up into the North Bay until they built Mission San Rafael, which is basically a mission hospital to try to stem the diseases of the Indians in Mission Dolores. And then they also built Mission San Francisco Solano, or the Sonoma Mission. And then the East Bay natives were affected also, even though it's far away, going into the Central Valley. They were sometimes rounded up by the soldiers and brought into the mission, sometimes forcibly. And once the Indians were at the mission, they were baptized. Not sure they knew what was going on, but they were baptized. And once you were baptized, you were considered a citizen and a member of the mission, and you could not leave. So they basically are locked up at the mission. If you ran away, they would come and get you, and then they would whip you for running away. By the end of the 19th century, the native population was about 15,000. Out of the 300,000 were originally in California, they estimate. So there was about a 90% reduction in population. The American period was even worse because the miners looked at Indians as worsted animals, and they thought nothing of killing whole villages, families, villages. They were burned to the ground, their food was destroyed, and they actually practiced genocide. One tribe called the Yahi that lived in the mountains above in Butte County was wiped out except for one man who showed up into Oroville in 1911. He was named later by the anthropologist Ishi, which is his name for his people, they think. But he was alone and starving, and they didn't know what to do with him. So when Alfred Kroeber, the anthropologist at the Natural History Museum in San Francisco, heard about it, he came up and brought Ishi back with him to the museum, which is where the UC Med Center is now in Parnassus Heights. Ishi was a remarkable man who somehow made that transition from the Stone Age to the modern age with a lot of grace and humor, even though communication remained a bit difficult because they didn't really learn his language. He never learned English that well. There was enough communication going on where he could show them, for example, how to make fire, how to make a bow, and his knowledge of the area was astounding. He took the anthropologists up to Deer Creek, which is where his tribe was. It was a rather painful trip for Ishi, but he showed them where his tribe lived, and he showed them about hunting and the plants, and he was just a wealth of information. He was at the museum for about 5 years, and then he sadly died of tuberculosis. His story was told by Theodora Kroeber, who was Alfred Kroeber's wife. She did a wonderful job in getting into the story of Ishi, and I highly recommend the book Ishi in Two Worlds because it gives a real insight into Native people's thinking and what life was like for them. By the way, his brain was removed after he died, and the Smithsonian held it. And in the 1990s, a researcher discovered that the Smithsonian still had the brain somewhere, which they denied at first, but then they found it. So finally, under the federal law that institutions had to make the best effort to return Native artifacts and bodies to their tribe, because there was no tribe left, they brought his brain back to the Wintu people of Sacramento, and they were the ones who properly cremated his brain so that he could join his ancestors. Now, this whole story about the missions and the Americans is a real downer, and I know you don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it. I know you should talk about it. And just to mention how awful things were for the Native people. But what I'm going to be telling you some positive things that you can bring into the conversation so that you can say that all is not lost, that there's a revival going on. And I'll get into that next. So here, for example, are some Ohlone dancers who are at a big time down in Southern California. They travel around to do their dancing. And this was they're wearing their traditional skirts, which was tule. and shell, and a rabbit skin or deer skin top. Lots of shells, because shells were valuable. Shells were like money to the tribe. So the more shells you had, it shows the wealthier you were. The man over there is blowing a whistle, so he's keeping time to the music. And they are doing a dance which has been passed down for generations. Thank goodness that the dances didn't die out, because a lot of Indians escaped into the remote areas of the state to keep their traditions alive. I'm going to tell you about the Pomo people who lived in what is now Sonoma Lake and Mendocino counties. They had a population estimated to be about 15,000. And today their population is, well, 10 years ago, it was 5,000 people. It's probably a bit more now. The northern and central Pomo avoided a lot of the contact with the Spanish. So their numbers didn't go down as drastically, quite as drastically as those who are connected with the mission. Today, some of them live in rancherias, which are like mini reservations, consisting of neighboring houses together. And some of them live in cities like Cloverdale, Lakeport, and Ukiah. I'm more familiar with the Keshaya Pomo, which are down by Fort Ross, because I've met them and talked to them and had some really wonderful encounters with them. The Pomo people were among the finest basket makers in the world. Here you can see some that reflect, imagine having to weave these designs, and it's just astounding to me that the basket maker would know when to start another color. And look at those figures in the large basket in the background. You know, that's just astounding to me how you can keep track of the design, because the designs are all in their head, and they would pass these designs down to their daughter. These baskets were so finely woven that they would hold water, and in fact that they would cook in them. So you get this big basket, it's tightly woven, you pour water into it, you pour in the acorn flour, and then you put in a hot rock from the fire. After washing it off from the fire, you put it into the basket. Then you have a special willow branch tool which moves the rock around so it doesn't burn a hole into the basket. You keep it moving until the water starts to boil, which is very quickly, and then you take out the rock, and within minutes you have a hot soup or a hot mush. Over to the left, you'll see some gift baskets, which are beautifully decorated. These would be given at weddings for special ceremonies. They're decorated with feathers and shells, and sometimes they wear them as hats as well. The craft is still being practiced today. Here are some women still preparing the materials for the baskets. They would use sedge, willow, and redwood for the materials. It's a little hard for them today because their traditional areas for collecting these things are often private property, so they have to beg the property owners to go in and collect them. Sometimes if it's on public lands, like in state parks, it's not a problem, but it's not as easy as it used to be for collecting the materials. Phoebe Hearst was the mother of William Randolph Hearst, and she was a really remarkable woman. You should read about her story. She was very cultured, very intelligent, very well-read. She traveled around the world. She was interested in cultures around the world, so she visited the pyramids. She helped in some of the excavations there, and she was especially interested in California people. And when she saw what was going on to the Native Americans, she purposely hired them to live on her estate in Pleasanton so that they would have a job, but mostly that they would be protected from the outside world. And she started collecting some of their baskets, and then she donated a lot of money to UC Berkeley to start a museum of anthropology, which is still there. And they have a collection of 8,000 baskets, which are on a rotating display. Now, there's some controversy about that because a lot of the tribes would like their baskets back. So there's negotiation going on back and forth about this whole matter, and it's going to be probably years before it gets resolved. But you can also see Pomo baskets at the Museum of the American Indian in Novato, the Oakland Museum, and the Kunstkamera Museum in St. Petersburg in Russia, next time you happen to be in Russia. And you might wonder, what are baskets doing in Russia? Well, as you probably know, the Russians built a fort at Fort Ross. This was built by the Russian American Fur Company. And they were there ostensibly to hunt sea otters for their fur, but they were also thinking about making inroads and claiming Northern California for them, because this was going to be their southernmost colony down from Alaska. So they built this fort, and they actually employed local Pomo people to work for them. And unlike the Spanish, they did not try to convert the Pomo. They did not try to change their culture. They actually paid them or exchanged goods for their work. So in a way, it was a more positive experience for the Pomo people compared to the Spanish. The Keshaya Pomo go to the big celebration they have every summer at Fort Ross. They do their dancing, and you'll see this type of headdress quite often in Bay Area tribes. The headband is made of feathers from the flicker bird and shells and feathers. And the idea is to hide the identity of the dancer because he is representing an animal or a spirit. So you don't see him, you see the spirit of the animal. And it also has a religious significance, but the Pomo keep that knowledge to themselves because it's sacred to them. The Russians also come up for this celebration, just so you know. It's really a wonderful event because the Russians will do Russian dancing and singing. The Pomos will do their dancing. Everybody brings food to share. Of course, they could not hold it this year. Who knows when they'll be able to hold it again. But as soon as the pandemic is over, I'm sure they'll start this up again because the state parks really support this whole idea of bringing these cultures together. And it's really an excellent time. This is a possibility for bringing tours up there from San Francisco because there's a lot to see, the Russian River and at Fort Ross. Sometimes the Archbishop comes up and says Mass in the chapel. You can see the chapel in the background. So he'll say, pardon me, the Divine Liturgy when he comes up there. And it's really a beautiful ceremony, but it's pretty packed in there. For years, the Pomo people have been trying to get access to their traditional lands so that they can hunt and fish. It's been very difficult for them, but a few years ago, they worked out an arrangement with the Save the Redwoods League, which owns a part of the coastline and up into the redwood forest above the Russian River, and also the state of California, so that the tribe can go again to the beaches again and fish for smelt, which was one of their traditional foods. Now I want to tell you about Indian casinos. This is the River Rock Casino owned by the Dry Creek Band of Southern Pomo, located near Geyserville in Sonoma County. In 1988, federal law allowed gaming on tribal lands as a means to self-sufficiency. It was a way of tribes to raise money so that they could, pay for things like schools and healthcare and homes and things like that. Many casinos opened, but the casino industries in other states were rather upset about it, as you might think. So they convinced the state to restrict Indian casinos, such as not allowing slot machines. But in 1989, the people of California voted to allow Indian casinos to have slot machines. The vote was a 2/3 majority. So today, 62 out of the 109 tribes in California have casinos. These are federally recognized tribes, I should say. Some of these casinos also include spas, resorts, RV parks, and theaters. The money they bring in is used for healthcare and their own schools and fire protection. Some of the rancherias that have their own fire station actually serve the whole community, these rural communities, not just for Indians, but for the local people. Next are the Coast Miwok people. And I'm going to go over it looks like I'm going to be going over the 5 o'clock period. So if you can stay with me, I'm probably going to go into past 5 o'clock. I hope you can stay with me. When the Spanish came into this area to establish a mission in San Rafael, the Miwok resisted. They probably heard tales from the southern tribes what was going on. So one of their leaders who resisted was Chief Marin, who attacked the Spanish several times and almost prevented them from forming the mission. But eventually he was captured and put into detention at Mission San Rafael. His stay there was for quite a while, and finally he was baptized and he became part of the mission. His companion Quentin was also memorialized by having a point of land named after him. So both Marin and Quentin were given the appropriate approbation of San, maybe as a joke, I'm not sure, but they put Saint in front of them, maybe because they were popular with their people. I don't know that story, but San Quentin got its name from this Miwok warrior, and so did the name of Marin County. You can see that these are bands of Miwok people. Each one was a distinct tribelet. Even though they spoke the same language, they were very distinct, and each had ruled its own territory. So if you went from one territory to another, you had to get permission from that tribe. And if you wanted to hunt or gather acorns, you would pay a tribute out of respect for their land. If you want to see how the Miwok lived along the coast, you can go to Kuliloklo, which is located in the Point Reyes National Seashore. The headquarters is located near Olin, and just a short walk from the headquarters is the Indian village. The village was actually built by volunteers, anthropologists, and graduate students who wanted to experience what it was like to build a village. So they did it, and they did it using native tools. So to build the dance house, they actually used abalone shell to dig out the big pit they needed to do. It took them years, and then they had to bring out the redwood logs and use flint tools to cut down the bark and so on. It was a major job, but at the end of it, you get a really good sense of what the Miwok village would look like. So they had these kochas, which are the dwellings, home dwellings for the people. You also had the tule kochas, which is, for maybe a larger family. This was the sweat house. And I should tell you that the Miwok and Pomo people come down every summer for a big time at the park. Again, the national parks and the state parks are very good at encouraging the native people to come on to the to public lands and have their ceremonies. So the Pomo Miwok people come and have a big time every summer. They do their dancing. You can get try some fry bread. You can listen to their stories. You can see how arrowheads are made. It's a really wonderful experience. Again, they couldn't have it this year, but at some point in the future, they'll resume. And if you go online to the Point Reyes National Seashore, they'll tell you all about when the next one will be. There are sweat lodges around the Bay Area that are run by Native people. I will try to put that on my resource sheet because some of them do invite non-Indians to their sweat lodge. And by the way, I will sometimes use their term Indian. It used to be a pejorative term, but now most tribal people don't mind you saying Indian. They understand, you know, that this is a term that white people use. They would prefer to be called by their tribal name, but they don't typically get upset if you call them Indians. A lot of them call themselves Indians still. Here are some Miwok dancers ready to come out to do the coming out of the dance house, where they did some preparation before coming out to do their dance, because the dances are sacred. Truly sacred dances aren't danced for the public, but the ones that can dance for the public, they will do. Some of these dancers are from the Grattan Rancheria, which is a federally recognized land for use of both the Southern Pomo and the Coast Miwok tribal members. Here is a Pomo dancer, part of that celebration. And here's Grattan Casino, located in Rohnert Park, run by the Federated Tribe of the Miwok Grattan Rancheria. To get federal recognition, you have to show that you've lived in a same area and have passed down your family through on that same area. And because so many Indians were kicked off their land, they couldn't claim and they couldn't stay in the land. It's very hard for them to claim the land that they were kicked off of. So so they have to give a really good case to prove in some way through records or whatever that they did used to occupy certain places of land in the county. The Olin State Park is located in Novato, just off Highway 101. It used to be an actual village from very, very ancient times, and the land remained in Indian lands thanks to General Vallejo, who donated this land to some families. But in 1863, it was acquired by the Burdell family. Later, that family built a huge estate, complete with a mansion and gardens, and it became the place to go in Marin County. Then it was bought by the University of San Francisco as a retreat for seminarians, and they leased out the mansion. One of the tenants was the Grateful Dead. I'm not sure what kind of condition the place was left in after their stay there, but then, believe it or not, the mansion was taken over by a hippie commune. And this became a very notorious commune in Novato. It was not, the neighbors really didn't like them being there. And the property, the mansion burned down in 1969. Fortunately, the state of California bought up the land and turned it into a public park and tried to restore some of the old historic buildings, and certainly to talk about the the Indian heritage of that place. By the way, while they were excavating the site, archaeologists found an English sixpence coin minted in 1567, which is further evidence that it was the Miwok people who who Sir Francis Drake encountered when he landed off the coast of Marin in 1579. He was on this around the world voyage, and he was traveling along the Northern California coast. The ship started to leak, the Golden Hind, so he had to careen it, which means that you bring it into the shallows, you turn it over, and you scrape off the barnacles and you patch up the leaks. So the Miwoks, of course, being curious, came out to meet them. And typically, as happened to all the European explorers, the native people were by and large very friendly, very welcoming. Although they initially thought that these people with the white faces coming out of the West were their ancestors, their spirits' ancestors. They thought they had come back from the dead. So that's why they treated him with awe and reverence at first, because they thought these were their ancestors. Drake stayed a month. He claimed the land for England, calling it New Nova Albion. And, you know, here's one of those crossroads in history. If he had just stayed a bit longer, or maybe the English had come back, then the history of California might have been a lot different. Or if the Russians had come down from Russia and established more colonies, we'd all be speaking Russian right now. So, you know, there's many different crossroads that history can take. So what has changed is the reputation of Captain Drake. He was always recognized as a world traveler, a world explorer, that he opened up the New World and showed Elizabethan England things about the New World they never knew. But a lot of people don't know this, that in his early career, in his sailing career, he was a captain of a ship that was transporting native people and Africans in the slave trade throughout the Caribbean. So they were bringing slaves from Africa, putting them on the sugar plantations so that they could send sugar to America and to England. So he doesn't have a great reputation among the coast Miwok, and they have been trying to get the Marin County to change the name of Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. And already Sir Francis Drake High School has changed its name. I'm not sure what they've changed it to, but it's been changed already. So there's history being changed once again. This is a result of the education that young Miwoks are getting, partly from the casino income, partly from student loans from the federal government. But anyway, young Miwoks are taking advantage of education to go into healthcare and business and teaching. And here is a graduate student named Don Hankins, who is currently working with the Forestry Service as he combines science and Indian knowledge of controlled burning so they can reduce the instances of huge wildfires, which, as you know, is a big thing right now. So the native people used to do controlled burning quite a lot because they knew, first of all, that if you don't take care of the underbrush, you get huge fires. They knew that. They also knew that you want to replenish the grasses every year, so you burn off the lower grasses every year by doing a slow burn. And they knew exactly the right time, and when the weather conditions are right, they knew exactly when to do this so that it didn't get out of hand. And then they could get rid of that underbrush, and then by springtime, you'd have a fresh crop of greens and seeds for their diet. So anyway, here he's doing a controlled burn. And I think they're going to be doing a lot more of that because you know, I'm a fire lookout in Marin County up on Mount Tam, and I've been told that the last burn there was about 100 years ago. So all that area is ripe for a big burn unless they do some more controlled burning, which is very difficult because so many houses there are right smack in the woods. So it's a matter of great concern. I want to tell you next about the Wappo people. If you travel through the beautiful hills and the valleys of Napa, I know you have. Imagine how beautiful it must have been before all the buildings and all the structures and roads. It was really, you know, you think of the Valley of the Moon, what an extraordinarily gorgeous place it was. And this was the home of the Wappo people. Their name is a corruption of the Spanish word guapo, which means handsome. And they were, like so many native people, because of their good health, they were handsome, strong-looking people. They occupied much of the Napa Valley and going up along the Russian River valleys into Geyserville and, of course, Healdsburg. The Wappo women were also very fine basket makers, and they made good use of the abundant bird life because of the rivers. The deer and the fish from the rivers were abundant. But unfortunately, they were very impacted by the Sonoma and San Rafael missions, and as well, an epidemic wiped out, a measles epidemic wiped out most of the population. By 1900, the census listed only 15 full-blooded Wappo people. Their descendants are gaining in numbers, though. There are about 300 descendants of the Wappos living in various places in the Napa and Sonoma valleys. Here, Scott Gabaldon of the Wappo people is looking over their traditional lands in the Alexander Valley with his son. They've been trying to get federal recognition, but Senator Feinstein has consistently blocked it because you need the permission by the state senators for this to happen, and she's blocked it. And I think the reason why is because of the very strong, powerful agricultural interests in the Napa Valley and Alexander Valley who are against any casinos in the wine growing areas. The Wappo say that they don't have an intent to build a casino at the present time, although they can reserve the right to build it because it's their land. But the main thing they want to have is their own land again, so they can have their ceremonies and a place to go for communal get-togethers. But it's a long uphill battle, and that's the battle that's going on throughout the state for a lot of these tribes without federal recognition. I want to tell you next about the Ohlone people, and this is of a special interest to us because many of us do tours in the San Francisco and the East Bay and the peninsula, which is, you know, the territory of the Ohlones. And again, each band had a separate territory. So in San Francisco, it was the Ramaytush Ohlone. In my area, the Southern Peninsula, it was the Waswas community. The Mitsun was in the San Jose area. You know about the Ramsun, which is in the Monterey area, and the Chocheño, which is in the San Pablo, El Cerrito, that area. So I don't know what the current population is of Ohlone, but I know that prior to the contact, it was 18,000. It's probably in the thousands now. Maybe I'm just guessing 1,500. I'll try to find out what that number is. This is a scene of a village life on the coast in probably Pacifica, what is now Pacifica. And here you see a lot of things going on. the people in the East Bay and the San Francisco Peninsula had really an abundance of food because they had the advantage of the coastal foods, the valley foods, the delta foods, the bay foods, which was just teeming with life. So life for them was pretty good. They had plenty of food to carry them through the winter. Remember that Ohlone is a general designation similar to the term European to define a people of similar culture but who live independently. So when I talk about the Chochenyo Ohlone, that would be a very specific tribe, and their territory would be very distinct and separate from their neighboring Ohlone people. Even though each tribe was distinct, they would intermarry and they would trade with each other. We know the trade was very extensive. So, for example, the Ramaytush Ohlone of the coast might trade their seashells with the Wappo people up in the northern end of Napa Valley for their obsidian, because obsidian was what they used for making arrow points. So lots of trade was going on. They even think there was trade going on with the tribes to the east, because they have found trails going, into the Arizona and New Mexico area, and there's probably trade with even Mexico. So some researchers are still looking at that. Let me go back here, and I want to talk about the Mission Dolores. The Ohlone were gathered up by the missions and suffered a great decline in their numbers. There are about 5,700 Ohlone buried at Mission Dolores, and also that lie under the streets around the mission. Interestingly, the Mission San Francisco was the only mission out of all 21 missions whose curator is a Native American. Andrew Galvan is a descendant of an Ohlone chief who was baptized at the mission. He has a degree in anthropology, and he is uniquely qualified to speak about the Native experiences at the mission, and is purposely changing the narrative at the mission of the mission's history to reflect the Ohlone point of view. He occasionally gives tours of the mission himself, and I would highly recommend you to go on one of his tours. And when things open up, I'd like to organize a tour for guides so that we can go and meet him and take his tour at the mission. The Baloney Dancers come from various parts of the Bay Area. They have been holding on to their customs. And here are members of the Rumson Band of Baloney Dancers who've come to the annual celebration at the Presidio in San Francisco. They are teaching their children the Ohlone language and the Ohlone religion so that it won't die out. The Ohlones have also been active politically and trying to revise the history of the Catholic Church and the missions in California, and what led to the destruction of Native culture and populations. Interestingly, Andrew Galvan, who I just mentioned, his family has remained Catholic for all these generations. And he actually supported a canonization which declared Father Sarah a saint a few years ago by Pope Francis. And there's a whole story behind why St. Francis did that. Basically, it was so that the Hispanics could have their own saint. But in any case, the Ohlones are trying to get out the message that Father Sarah was no saint to them, and but Andrew Galvan, his view is that the Franciscans had good intentions, but they just had a lot of unintended consequences, like bringing the diseases to the people. So that issue is an ongoing one. But here's a wonderful story you can end with, which I'm going to end with too, and it's the story of these two young Ohlone men who run the Ohlone Cafe in Berkeley. They are Vincent Medina and Louis Trevino. Vincent is on the right, Louis is on the left. They decided, as they studied more and more about their culture from their elders, they said, why not, what better way to teach our culture to others than through food? So they did intensive studies and learned how to prepare Ohlone food. And they go out and hunt for the deer and the fish and the seaweed and so on. They collect the herbs, they collect the quail eggs, and then they bring it back and they prepare it at their little cafe, which is on Telegraph Avenue. It's closed now, of course, but they want to open up again once the pandemic is over. And you can the lunch is kind of expensive. It's about $40, but where else can you go to get truly authentic Native American food? They have things on the menu such as duck breast topped with strawberry sauce, dandelion soup, bay nut truffles, and many more items. But the great thing is that every meal they give a little language lesson of Ohlone, and they give a brief history of their people, and end with the phrase, "We are still here." Yes, they are still here, and we are enriched by the presence of our Native people. And with that, I want to end on that note. And if we have time, I'd like to answer any questions you might have. So I'll turn it over to you, Roberto.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for this beautiful and interesting presentation. I like the idea of ending it is with food, which is always like the best way to promote a culture.
Yeah, if we were doing this in person, I'd have some Ohlone snacks for you, but unfortunately we can't do it right now.
No, well, next time. I have a question. Actually, there's 3 questions from the same person, which is Jessica Lam from San Francisco Travel Association. She had to say goodbye already. She left, but her questions, I think they're very valuable. For the first one is, are there ways we visitors can engage and learn more about native culture and tribes? The second one is, are there Native Americans organization groups that we can partner with to support native culture? And then the third one is, if we were to offer a tour about native culture in San Francisco, what should we highlight?
Those are great questions. And let me say that the best way to encounter Native people is to go to one of those events I mentioned. So they do have powwows. They have, which is American Indians in general. And every year there's a big powwow at Stanford University where tribes from all over come and do dances and have food. And you can sit down with them. They're very welcoming, very open for people, because they want to educate people about their culture. So I would highly recommend, once these events start taking place again, to go to them, and don't be shy about going up and asking questions of the people, because they're very generous with their questions. Yes, there are centers where you can go. I would say if you go to the Hearst Museum in the part of UC Berkeley, they've got a wonderful display of native cultures and also of Ishi. A lot of his artifacts are there. So that's one place. On my list of resources, I'm going to talk about all the Indian museums you can go to. I'll list all the events that are held every year, and I'll list the Indian associations you can contact if you want to contact Native people directly to ask questions. And then what was the last question? About a tour? Yes.
Yeah, I guess San Francisco Travel could be interested in offering like a tour of native culture in San Francisco.
So that's a great idea, and I will be happy to help anybody who wants to do that. So that'll be part of my package that I'll send everybody. Len has offered to email everybody this list of resources I'm putting together, and that will be included in the list of possible places to go for a tour.
Yeah, we will send out all these resources and information together with the recording of the presentation. I personally have been a few years ago to a big powwow. I remember it was in Fort Mason.
Yes.
It was several years ago. That was one of my first experiences with Native American culture in the Bay Area, and it was beautiful. And I also have been in January, February and March, right before the pandemic, to Native American Red Market in, I think it was in Fruitvale, close to Fruitvale Station in the East Bay. And then there was like in the Mission in front of the Culture Center, there was the Mexica New Year celebration in March. It was also with Aztec dancer. It was also very interesting.
You know, another thing we can do, because we had the Ohlone gentleman come to our museum in Pacifica, and they catered a lunch for us and gave us a little history lesson. We could do that with the guild. You know, we could find a location, and they'd be very happy to come. It would cost everybody about maybe $25, but you get a luncheon and a history lesson, and they are just great speakers. So let's plan on that for the future.
Oh yeah, that would be really great. Then we have a comment from Sylvie. She says, I believe Andrew Galvan did not only support the sainthood for Sarah, but went to the ceremony with the Pope and was given the opportunity to give a speech there in Ohlone language.
Yes, he did. He did. He was at that ceremony, but he, from what I read, he was active in the canonization. But I'll check on that to make sure, because I don't want to say anything wrong.
And then Mark mentioned that the major office of community development has established American Indian Cultural Center and District in San Francisco. That will provide local culture information and resources for the local Native American community. There's the website. It's listed on the chat box too.
Oh, good, because I want to add that to my resources.
Yeah, that's for sure. Anyone else? There's questions for Steve. I don't see any other question. They can also unmute themselves, and feel free to unmute yourself and just ask your question if you like. Indian Canyon Center offer tours for guides.
That's really good to know. Thank you for that.
Well, we got some messages from, congratulations for the presentation, Steve. It was very, very informative and interesting. Since I don't see any other question coming in, we can probably end our event right here.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Stay healthy, everybody. And let's look forward to the time when we can all get together in person.
Thank you so much again, everyone, for staying with us tonight. Thank you, Steve, again. And we will send you all the resources and the link on your email pretty soon. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Roberto.
Bye-bye.